Her business failed, and her husband stared at her with contempt. "I can't live with a loser wife," he spat. She said nothing, held her head high, and left, spending the night in her car while planning her comeback. The next morning, a butler called. His billionaire employer urgently wanted to see her before finalizing his will. She went, and he said, "I've been watching you. I want you to lead my most important project." Once dismissed, humiliated, and underestimated, she now stood on the brink of an empire he could never touch. "Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty bless every woman with unmatched strength, endless dignity, and a heart so pure it lights up the world. May every step you take be guided by grace, every home you touch overflow with joy, and every act of love you give return to you 1,000-fold. Women are the heartbeat of every family, the silent power that holds the world together, and the guardians of hope and kindness. My precious family, always honor and respect the women around you. They are treasures beyond measure, shaping lives with courage and love. Let us celebrate them, cherish them, and keep their spirits shining bright in our hearts. If your heart is true like the video, if your love is real, write, 'I am with Mr. Peter.'" Her business failed, and her husband stared at her with contempt. "I can't live with a loser wife," he spat. She said nothing, held her head high, and left, spending the night in her car while planning her comeback. The electricity had been cut 3 hours before Rich Martin came home. Brenda Reynolds sat in the dark kitchen of their apartment, surrounded by unopened bills and a laptop screen that glowed with the email she'd read 17 times. Her largest client, the one who accounted for half her catering revenue, had terminated their contract. Not because of her work, because someone lied. The vendor she'd fired last month for consistently delivering spoiled produce had apparently spent the past few weeks telling anyone who would listen that Brenda's kitchen practices were questionable. The lie spread. Her client believed it without asking her side. The contract ended immediately. She'd spent the afternoon calling her other clients, trying to salvage what remained. Two had already heard the rumors. They were exploring other options. Her business was dying in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The apartment door opened. Rich walked in, still wearing his suit from the office, and flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. "Did you forget to pay the electric bill?" His voice carried an edge she'd been hearing more often lately. "We're behind on a few things." She kept her voice steady. "I'll handle it. You'll handle it." He dropped his briefcase on the counter, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "The same way you've been handling your business?" She looked up at him. The man she married used to ask how her day went before he criticized it. That version of Rich had disappeared somewhere between his second promotion and the moment her income started dropping. "I lost the Hartley contract today." She forced herself to say it out loud. "Someone spread lies about my kitchen standards. Hartley didn't bother to verify. They just cancelled." Rich stared at her like she'd confessed to a crime. "The Hartley contract was your biggest account." "I'm aware. So what's your plan?" He crossed his arms. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just sitting in the dark, feeling sorry for yourself." The words hit harder than they should have. She'd been awake for nearly 20 hours, making calls, sending emails, trying to contain the damage. But he didn't ask about that. He only saw the result. "I'm working on it," she said quietly. "Working on it." Rich laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what Jennifer said to me today? She asked if everything was okay at home because I seemed stressed I had to stand there and pretend my wife's failing business isn't becoming the talk of the office. I didn't realize my problems were such an inconvenience for you. They are when they affect my reputation." He loosened his tie with sharp movements. "I'm up for another promotion. The firm is watching everything I do, and meanwhile, my wife can't even keep the lights on." Brenda stood slowly, her hands pressed flat against the table to keep them from shaking. "I've supported every single one of your promotions. I worked double shifts when you were studying for the bar exam. I never once made you feel small for struggling. That's different. I was building something. You're just... He gestured vaguely at the darkened kitchen. You're failing. The word hung between them like smoke. Get out, she said. What? I said get out. This is my apartment. My name is on the lease, so get out. Rich's expression shifted to something uglier. Fine. Stay here in your little failure cave, but don't expect me to go down with you. He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the bedroom. She heard drawers opening, the sound of him throwing clothes into a bag. He emerged 10 minutes later with an overnight bag and the leather jacket she'd saved for months to buy him last Christmas at the door. He turned back. I can't live with a loser wife, Brenda. I just can't. Then he was gone. She stood in the center of the dark apartment, listening to the silence he left behind. She should have cried. She should have felt something other than this strange, cold clarity. Instead, she walked to the bedroom and pulled her own suitcase from the closet. She packed methodically, clothes, toiletries, the folder containing all her business documents, her laptop. She left behind the wedding photos on the dresser, the kitchen gadgets she'd collected, the life they'd built that apparently meant nothing the moment she stopped being useful. Her car was parked 3 blocks away, a 10-year-old sedan that needed new tires and made a concerning noise when she accelerated too quickly. She threw her suitcase in the trunk and drove until she reached the waterfront, where the city lights reflected off the dark water. She reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go and wrapped herself in the winter coat she kept in the back seat. The temperature was dropping. She could see her breath in the air. From her purse, she pulled out the small planner she'd been using since culinary school. The pages were filled with recipes, notes, ideas she'd never had time to pursue. She flipped to a blank page and started writing. What went wrong? What she could have done differently? What she would do if she got another chance? The vendor issue. She should have documented everything, built a paper trail, made sure she had evidence if anyone questioned her practices. The client loss. She should have diversified sooner, not relied so heavily on one contract. The business structure. She should have incorporated, built something more stable, something that could survive a hit like this. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the planner was full of plans and possibilities, and the kind of clear-headed thinking that only comes when you've lost everything and have nothing left to protect. Dawn broke slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Brenda watched the sunrise through her windshield, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, her breath still fogging the cold air. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then something made her press accept. Is this Brenda Reynolds? The voice was male, older, calm, speaking. My name is Lawrence. I'm the personal assistant to Harrison Webb. Mr. Webb would like to meet with you this morning regarding a potential opportunity. Would you be available? Brenda sat up straight, her mind racing. Harrison Webb. She knew the name. Everyone in the hospitality industry did Billionaire developer, hotel empire, the kind of success story people whispered about like legend. I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person. Ms. Reynolds, you catered a charity event several seasons ago. Julia Reeves was there. She now works in our marketing department. She's mentioned your name more than once. Mr. Webb is considering a consulting position and would like to speak with you before making any decisions. Would 9 o'clock work? Brenda looked down at herself. She was wearing yesterday's clothes, sitting in a car that smelled like French fries from the drive-through bag she'd forgotten in the back seat last week. She had $47 in her checking account and nowhere to go. 9 o'clock would be fine, she heard herself say. Excellent. Webb Tower, penthouse-level security will be expecting you. The line went dead. Brenda sat in her car, watching the city wake up around her, and started laughing. It wasn't happy laughter. It was the slightly unhinged sound of someone who'd just lost everything and somehow gotten a meeting with a billionaire in the same 12-hour period. She had 2 hours to make herself presentable enough to walk into Webb Tower. She had $47 and a suitcase full of wrinkled clothes, and she had absolutely nothing left to lose. Chapter 2. I don't hire people who haven't failed. Harrison Webb was 83, rail-thin, and sitting in a penthouse office that overlooked the city like a kingdom. He didn't smile when she walked in. Brenda had stopped at her sister's house to borrow a blazer and use the shower. Her sister took one look at her face and asked no questions, just handed her coffee and a navy jacket that was slightly too big. Now Brenda stood in an office that probably cost more than her entire failed business, trying not to look like someone who'd slept in her car. The elevator ride up had been interminable. 43 floors of polished brass and mirrors that reflected back a woman who looked more composed than she felt. Her reflection showed someone professional, capable. The woman underneath was exhausted and terrified and running on nothing but stubbornness. Harrison sat behind a desk made of dark wood, his hands folded on top of a thin manila folder. Lawrence, the assistant who'd called her, stood near the window like a statue. The silence in the room felt deliberate, like a test she hadn't studied for. "Sit." Harrison's voice was rough, like gravel under tires. She sat, keeping her spine straight despite every instinct telling her to curl inward and protect herself from whatever judgment was coming. He opened the folder. Inside was a single printed page, her resume from 3 seasons ago, the one she'd submitted when applying to cater that charity event. Someone had written notes in the margins in blue ink. She couldn't read them from where she sat, but seeing her own credentials marked up made her stomach tighten. "Julia Reeves tells me you saved her career when she was nobody." He looked up at her with eyes that missed nothing. "Says you let her write about your kitchen when every other chef in this city told her to get lost. That true?" She needed content. I needed exposure. It worked for both of us. Practical. Harrison tapped the resume. "She also says you're the only person she's ever met who can run a full-service kitchen with 2 broken ovens and a staff that doesn't speak the same language. That true too?" "The ovens were fixed eventually. The language barrier was harder, but we managed." "How did you manage?" The question wasn't casual. He wanted details, wanted to see how she thought. "I learned enough Spanish to give basic instructions, hired one of the line cook's daughters as a translator for the complicated stuff, created a system of colored cards for common tasks so we could communicate quickly during service." She met his gaze. "When you can't rely on words, you find other ways to make yourself understood." Harrison leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight, the only sound in the vast office. "I've interviewed 8 people for this position. Every single one of them had fancy degrees and corporate experience. Every single one of them bored me to tears." He closed the folder with a definitive snap. "Tell me what happened to your business." The question was direct, almost brutal in its simplicity. She appreciated that more than she would have expected. "I fired a vendor who was delivering spoiled ingredients. He retaliated by spreading lies about my kitchen practices to anyone who would listen. My largest client believed him without asking for my side of things. They terminated the contract immediately. No conversation, no chance to defend myself. 2 other clients heard the same rumors and followed within days. By yesterday afternoon, I didn't have enough revenue to keep the doors open." "Why didn't you fight back?" "With what? Legal action takes money I don't have and time I can't afford. By the time I could prove he was lying, my reputation would be ruined anyway. Sometimes the damage happens faster than you can stop it." Harrison studied her face like he was reading text written there. "What would you have done differently?" The question surprised her. Most people asked, what went wrong? He was asking what she'd learned. Documentation, every interaction, every delivery, every complaint. "I should have been building a paper trail from day one, not just running on trust and handshake agreements. I should have diversified my client base sooner, instead of letting one contract become 60% of my income. and I should have built something with legal protection instead of operating as a sole proprietor where everything was my personal liability. So you know exactly what mistakes you made? I do now. Harrison nodded slowly, like she'd passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. He stood up, moving to the window with surprising steadiness for a man his age. I'm opening a property in Richmond, not fancy, not a major market, a test location to see if my brand works outside the big cities. He stared out at the city below. My corporate people think it's a waste of resources. They want me to stick with what we know, Manhattan, Miami, Los Angeles, safe bets, proven markets. I think they're afraid of trying something that might actually fail. Brenda stayed quiet, waiting. She'd learned early that powerful people revealed more when you didn't rush them. I need someone to run operations for 6 months, get the place open, train the staff, make sure it doesn't collapse the first time something goes wrong. He turned to face her. It's a consulting contract, not a permanent position. Fixed term, fixed pay. No guarantees beyond the initial 6 months. What's the pay? $78,000 for 6 months, paid monthly, plus relocation expenses and temporary housing. She did the math despite trying not to. It was more than she'd made in the last 2 seasons combined. It was also temporary, which meant in 6 months she could be right back where she started, unemployed, broke, starting over again. Why me? She asked. If you've interviewed 8 people with better credentials, why are you talking to me? Harrison returned to his desk, lowering himself into the chair with careful precision. Because every single one of those people has never lost anything. They don't know what it feels like to watch something they built fall apart through no fault of their own. They don't know how to fight when their back is against the wall, and the easy option is to give up. He fixed her with a look that felt like being X-rayed. You do. That doesn't guarantee I'll succeed. No, but it guarantees you won't quit the first time things get hard. You'll figure it out because you don't have the luxury of walking away. That's worth more to me than a resume full of corporate titles. He tapped the folder again. I don't hire people who haven't failed, Ms. Reynolds. I hire people who know how to get back up. The ones who've never fallen don't know how to handle it when they finally do. And everyone falls eventually. The office felt smaller suddenly. The weight of the offer pressing down on her shoulders. 6 months, a chance. Maybe her only chance. There's a catch, Harrison continued, his voice matter-of-fact. My vice president of operations hates this Richmond project. His name is Gordon Hale, and he's going to do everything in his power to prove it's a mistake, which means he's going to be watching you like a hawk, waiting for you to mess up so he can say he was right all along. Why keep him on if he's actively working against you? Because he's been with this organization longer than you've been alive, and he has relationships I can't easily replace, plus institutional knowledge that would take a decade to rebuild. Harrison's expression didn't change. Also, he's not entirely wrong to be skeptical. This project could fail. Most new ventures do, especially when you're trying something outside your comfort zone, but that doesn't mean it's not worth attempting. He leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk. I'm telling you this because I don't believe in sending people into situations blind. If you take this job, you'll be fighting on 2 fronts, making the property work and dealing with someone who wants you gone. Gordon is smart, experienced, and politically connected. He'll undermine you in ways that are difficult to prove or combat. Can you handle that? Brenda thought about the apartment she'd walked away from last night. The marriage that ended with an insult. The business that collapsed because one person decided to lie and another decided to believe him without asking questions. She thought about sleeping in her car with $47 and a planner full of ideas she'd never gotten to try. She thought about the woman who'd let those things break, her versus the woman who could use them as fuel. I can handle it, she said. Harrison studied her for a long moment. The people who succeed in this industry aren't the ones who have it easy. They're the ones who get knocked down and decide the ground isn't where they belong. He picked up a pen. I'm offering you 6 months to prove what you can do. Whether you succeed or fail will be on your own merit, nobody else's. No excuses, no one to blame, just you and the work. When do I start? Monday. You'll need to be in Richmond by then. Lawrence will handle your relocation logistics, temporary housing, travel arrangements, initial budget allocations. He signed something on his desk, not looking up. One more thing. Yes? I'm 83. I've built more than I can count and lost more than most people will ever have. You know what I've learned? He set down his pen and met her eyes. The people who make it aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who fall and decide the ground isn't where they belong. Don't make me regret this. I won't. We'll see most people who sit in that chair make the same promise. Half of them are gone within 3 months. His expression was neutral, unreadable. Prove you're not most people. Lawrence stepped forward, holding a thin packet of papers. These are the preliminary contracts. You'll want to review them carefully before signing, Ms. Reynolds. Do you have legal representation? Brenda took the packet. I don't have an attorney. Then read them carefully yourself, Harrison said. Pay attention to the performance benchmarks and early termination clauses. Everything is spelled out, no surprises. Lawrence guided her to the door with a gentle hand on her elbow. In the elevator going down, she opened the packet. The contract was straightforward. 6 months, specific deliverables, salary paid in monthly installments, performance reviews every 30 days, benchmarks that seemed ambitious but not impossible. At the bottom of the last page, someone had written in the same blue ink from her resume, "Don't let Gordon intimidate you. He's a bully, but he's not stupid. Prove the work and he'll back down. Good luck." HHW. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Brenda walked out into the sunlight, still holding the contract, and allowed herself one moment of pure, unfiltered relief. She wasn't going to sleep in her car tonight. She had work. She had a chance. Her phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Rich and a text. "We need to talk about the apartment. You can't just disappear." She deleted the text without reading it twice, blocked his number, and called her sister. "I need help packing," she said when her sister answered. "I'm moving to Richmond on Monday." "For what?" "For a chance to start over. For a job that might save my life or destroy me. I won't know which until I try." Her sister was quiet for a moment. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. And Brenda, I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than they should have. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of her? Brenda stood on the sidewalk outside Webb Tower, watching people rush past in their determined mourning. Trajectories. Somewhere above her, Harrison Webb was probably already in another meeting, making another decision that would change someone's life with the casual authority of someone who'd been doing it for decades. She'd walked into that building with nothing. She was leaving with a contract that could change everything. Or it could fail spectacularly, and she'd be right back where she started in 6 months. Either way, she wasn't sleeping in her car tonight. That felt like victory enough for now. Chapter 3. The woman I married wouldn't have given up. 3 months later, Rich Martin realized his wife wasn't coming back. The first week, he'd assumed she was staying with her sister, cooling off. He'd sent flowers to her sister's house with a card that said, "Let's talk." They were returned unopened. The second week, he tried calling. Her number was disconnected. The third week, he drove past their apartment building and saw a moving truck outside. By the time he got upstairs, the apartment was empty except for the furniture that had been there when they moved in. She'd taken everything that mattered to her and left behind everything that connected to him. Now it was late spring, and Rich sat in his new apartment, smaller than the last one, in a less desirable neighborhood, staring at his phone. He'd tried her sister again this morning. This time, instead of silence, he got an answer. She doesn't want to hear from you, Rich. I just need to know she's okay. She's better than okay. She's in Richmond. Richmond? Doing what? Working, thriving, not thinking about you. Her sister's voice was cold in a way it had never been before. Leave her alone. The line went dead. Rich set his phone down and looked around his apartment. Boxes still lined the walls from when he'd moved in last month. His girlfriend, Tanya, a paralegal from his firm, had started leaving her things here. A toothbrush in the bathroom, running shoes by the door. The slow creep of someone moving into a space that didn't quite feel like his yet. He'd started seeing Tanya 2 weeks after Brenda left. Not because he wanted to, but because she'd asked him to dinner and he couldn't think of a reason to say no. She was attractive, successful, uncomplicated. Everything was easy with Tanya. Too easy. She never asked about the recipe cards he kept in his desk drawer, the ones written in Brenda's handwriting with notes about adjusting cook times and ingredient substitutions. She never mentioned the way he sometimes zoned out during conversations, thinking about someone who wasn't there. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Saw something interesting online, call me." He called. "There's an article in the hospitality newsletter," his mother said without preamble. "About a hotel opening in Richmond. Brenda's name is mentioned." "What does it say?" "That she's consulting for web enterprises, that the opening exceeded expectations, that she's—" His mother paused. "She's doing well, Rich. Really well." He opened his laptop and searched, found the article. There was a photo of a boutique hotel with elegant lighting and clean lines below it. A caption, "Consultant Brenda Reynolds played a key role in the property's successful launch." Not a big photo, not a glowing profile, just a mention, just proof that she existed somewhere without him. "I have to go," he told his mother. "Rich," he hung up. Tanya came over that evening with takeout and a smile that faltered when she saw his face. "Bad day. Just tired." They ate in silence. She tried to make conversation about someone at the office, some gossip he should care about but didn't. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork. "You're not here," she said. "I'm sitting right in front of you." "No, you're somewhere else. You've been somewhere else since we started dating." She wiped her mouth with a napkin, precise and careful. "Who is she?" "Who is who?" "The woman you're not over." Rich wanted to lie. The lie sat right there on his tongue, ready and easy. Instead, he said nothing. Tanya nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she already knew. "I found recipe cards in your desk last week, handwritten. They had little notes in the margins, things like, 'Rich loves this version better,' and 'make double next time.' I thought they were your mother's at first. Then I realized the handwriting was too young." "You went through my desk? You left it open." She stood up, collecting her purse. "I'm not stupid, Rich. I know when I'm competing with a ghost. I just didn't realize how badly I was losing." "Tanya, wait. The recipe cards are still in your drawer, the ones you look at when you think I'm not paying attention, the ones you've never mentioned in 3 months of dating." She headed for the door. "I like you, Rich, but I'm not going to love someone who's still in love with someone else. That's not fair to either of us." She left before he could respond. Rich sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the ghost of a relationship that had barely started before it ended. He pulled open the desk drawer. The recipe cards were there, held together with a rubber band that had started to deteriorate. He pulled one out at random, Brenda's handwriting, neat and slanted. "Honey, garlic chicken, Rich's favorite. Remember to score the skin for crispiness. He always says this is the best thing I make." She'd written that before everything fell apart, when she still thought he was someone worth cooking for. When he was someone worth the effort. His father called that weekend, wanting to meet for lunch. They sat in a diner near the courthouse, and his father ordered black coffee and said what he'd come to say. Your mother told me about Brenda. There's nothing to tell. She's doing well, you're not. His father stirred sugar into his coffee with slow, deliberate movements. That paralegal you were seeing, what happened? We broke up. Why? Rich traced the rim of his water glass. She said I was still in love with someone else. Was she wrong? The question hung there, unanswered and unanswerable. His father sighed. I liked Brenda. She had spine. She worked harder than anyone I'd ever met, and she never complained about it. You know what I remember most about her? What? The way she looked at you like you'd hung the moon, like everything you did mattered. His father met his eyes. And I remember the way you looked at her after you started making real money, like she was an embarrassment you were trying to hide. That's not fair. Isn't it? You made partner track, and suddenly your wife's catering business wasn't impressive enough. You started going to firm events alone. You stopped mentioning her when people asked about your life. His father drank his coffee. The woman I met at your wedding wouldn't have put up with that forever. I'm only surprised she lasted as long as she did. Rich pushed his untouched food around his plate. I made a mistake. You made several. The question is whether you've learned anything from them. Like what? Like the difference between someone who supports your success and someone who looks good next to it. Brenda was the first. You treated her like the second. His father stood, leaving cash on the table. I need to get back to the office. Think about what you're going to do with yourself, son. Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a man who threw away the best thing in his life and hasn't figured out how to live with it. That night, Rich searched for Brenda online. Her social media accounts were gone, deleted or blocked. He couldn't tell which. He found a professional profile that listed her as a consultant for web enterprises, but included no personal information, no contact details, no way to reach her. He drafted an email to Web Enterprises' general contact address, deleted it, drafted another, deleted that too. What would he even say? I'm sorry I called you a loser when your business failed. I regret everything and please give me another chance. The words felt hollow before he even wrote them down. His phone buzzed with a text from a coworker. Drinks tonight? He went. Sat at a bar with people from the firm, drinking beer he didn't taste while they talked about cases and clients and weekend plans. Someone mentioned getting engaged. Someone else complained about their spouse forgetting an anniversary. Rich thought about the anniversary he'd forgotten last season, their 6th. He'd been working on a big case, and it slipped his mind entirely. Brenda hadn't said anything. She'd just set aside the dinner she'd made and gone to bed early. He'd noticed the next day, apologized in passing, and moved on. She'd probably been keeping score of every small hurt, every casual dismissal, every moment he chose work over her, building a case for why leaving made sense. He couldn't blame her for that. On his way home, he drove past the building where her catering business used to be. It was dark now, empty, with a for lease sign in the window. He wondered if she'd driven past it before leaving for Richmond. If she'd looked back at what she'd lost. Probably not. Brenda wasn't the type to look back. He was. That was the difference between them, he realized. She moved forward, even when moving forward meant walking away from everything familiar. He stood still, wondering if standing still long enough would somehow reverse time. Rich parked outside his apartment and sat in his car, engine off, staring at nothing. Inside, his apartment would be quiet and empty. No smell of cooking, no sound of Brenda humming while she worked, no recipe cards being added to the collection in the kitchen, just silence and the slow realization that he'd destroyed something irreplaceable because he'd been too proud to see its value until it was gone. He thought about the article his mother mentioned. Brenda's name in print, connected to something successful. Not a failure anymore, not a loser, just someone who'd rebuilt without him. The woman he'd married wouldn't have given up, he thought, and she hadn't. She'd just given up on him. That hurt worse than anything he could have imagined. Chapter 4. Nobody thought she could pull it off. The Richmond opening was supposed to fail. Brenda made sure it didn't. Gordon Hale showed up on her third day with a clipboard and an expression that said he'd already decided she was temporary. He was 50-something, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from outlasting everyone who'd ever challenged him. He walked through the property like he owned it, which technically he didn't, but his presence filled the space anyway. Harrison tells me you're handling the launch. He didn't offer to shake her hand, just stood in the unfinished lobby, surveying the construction dust and exposed wiring like evidence of a crime. That's correct. Your contract says 6 months. Most consultants in your position last 3 before they realize they're in over their heads and disappear quietly. He made a note on his clipboard. I'm here to conduct an assessment of your preliminary plans. Walk me through your vision for the guest experience. Brenda had dealt with men like Gordon before, men who tested you by acting like your presence was an inconvenience they were obligated to tolerate. She'd learned early that the only thing they respected was competence delivered without apology. She spent the next hour walking him through every decision she'd made, the local suppliers she'd partnered with instead of using corporate-approved vendors. The hiring strategy focused on community members rather than importing staff from other properties. The menu design that highlighted regional ingredients, Gordon listened without interrupting, making notes that she couldn't read from where she stood. When she finished, he closed his clipboard and looked at her directly for the first time. These supplier partnerships you're proposing, they're not vetted through our standard procurement process. That's a deviation from protocol. The protocol was designed for urban properties with established vendor networks. Richmond doesn't have the same infrastructure. I'm building relationships that make sense for this specific location. And if one of these local suppliers fails to deliver, then I have backup options. I'm not putting all our resources into untested partnerships. I'm diversifying the risk. Gordon's expression didn't change. I'll need detailed documentation of every vendor agreement, every contingency plan, every deviation from standard operating procedure, on my desk by end of week. You'll have it tomorrow. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe or annoyance that she hadn't pushed back. Fine, I'll review and provide feedback. He left without saying goodbye. Brenda's assistant, a local woman named Kim who'd worked in hospitality for 15 seasons, appeared from the back office where she'd been listening. He's going to make your life miserable. Probably. So why antagonize him by doing everything differently? Because doing it the standard way would guarantee this property fails. Brenda pulled out her own notes. Corporate strategy works in major markets where you can rely on established systems. Here we need to be part of the community, not just another chain hotel dropping into their neighborhood. Gordon knows that. He's just testing whether I know it too. By the end of the week, she'd submitted documentation so thorough that even Gordon couldn't find legitimate holes to poke in it. He responded with an email that said simply, "Proceed with current vendor strategy, progress review in 30 days. Not approval, but not refusal either. The real battle started when her budget request came back with 40% of her line items rejected. The explanation was coded in corporate language, but the message was clear. Gordon was making sure she had to fight for every resource she adapted, cut costs in areas that wouldn't affect guest experience, found creative solutions that didn't require corporate approval, convinced vendors to extend payment terms by offering them prominent placement in promotional materials, built partnerships instead of transactions. Opening night arrived on a Tuesday in early autumn. The property was smaller than anything else in the Webb portfolio, just 48 rooms, a restaurant that seated 60, a rooftop bar that overlooked the river. Nothing flashy, but every detail was intentional, from the art on the walls by local painters to the cocktail menu that featured spirits from a distillery 2 towns over. Brenda stood in the lobby at 5 in the evening, watching her staff move through their final preparations. Kim was directing the front desk team. The chef she'd hired, a woman who'd been running a food truck for 3 seasons, was in the kitchen, calm and focused. The housekeeping supervisor was doing a last walkthrough of every room. Harrison arrived at 6, moving slowly but steadily, Lawrence trailing behind him. Gordon came too, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Show me what you've built," Harrison said. She took him through the property, pointing out details without overselling them. The room design that prioritized comfort over luxury, the restaurant layout that encouraged conversation, the rooftop space that felt intimate despite the view. Harrison nodded occasionally, asked sharp questions, listened to her answers with the kind of attention that felt like being X-rayed. In the restaurant, he ordered from the menu and waited while the kitchen prepared his food. When it arrived, he tasted it slowly, methodically, set down his fork. "This is good." 2 words. From Harrison, it might as well have been a standing ovation. Gordon ordered the same dish, clearly intending to find fault. He ate in silence, his expression neutral. When he finished, he said nothing. By 8, the first guests were checking in. Couples celebrating anniversaries, a family visiting from out of state, business travelers who'd chosen this property over the chain hotels downtown. Brenda watched them move through the space, noticing everything, where they paused, what caught their attention, whether the flow felt natural. The restaurant filled up. The rooftop bar had a wait list by 9. Harrison left at 10, pulling Brenda aside before he went, "You have 30 days to prove this wasn't luck. Then we'll talk about what comes next." Gordon left without speaking to her at all. By midnight, when the last dinner reservation finished and the bar started winding down, Brenda finally let herself feel it. Exhaustion, relief, the fragile hope that maybe this was the beginning of something that could last. Kim found her sitting in the back office, staring at reservation numbers on her laptop. "We're fully booked for the next 2 weeks. The phone hasn't stopped ringing since the local food blogger posted about dinner." "That's good." "That's better than good. That's..." Kim sat down across from her. "You know what Gordon told me when he heard Harrison was hiring you? He said you'd be gone before the property even opened. He bet money on it. Did he win his bet?" "Not yet." Kim grinned. "But he's going to be watching everything, waiting for you to slip up. So don't." "I'll do my best." The next morning, a trade publication ran a small piece about the opening. It mentioned the Richmond property as a promising addition to the web portfolio and included a line about innovative local partnerships. Brenda's name was buried in the 3rd paragraph. Gordon sent her an email that afternoon. "Adequate start. Revenue projections due Friday. Guest satisfaction reports weekly. Any variance from projected performance requires immediate explanation. Not congratulations, just more hoops to jump through." She sent back a professional response and got to work. Over the next month, she established rhythms, weekly staff meetings, daily check-ins with department heads, constant small adjustments based on guest feedback. The chef tweaked the menu. The bar manager refined the cocktail list. The front desk learned to anticipate what different types of guests needed before they asked. Gordon showed up every other week for inspections that felt more like interrogations. He questioned every decision, scrutinized every expense, challenged every deviation from how things were supposed to be done. Brenda met every challenge with documentation and results. When he questioned her staffing levels, she showed him productivity metrics. When he criticized her marketing spend, she showed him booking percentages. When he implied she was getting preferential treatment from Harrison, she invited him to review her performance without bias. He couldn't find genuine fault because there wasn't any to find. She wasn't perfect, but she was thorough, and she was careful never to make the same mistake twice. The second month was stronger than the first. The third was stronger than the second. Reviews appeared online, praising the personal touches, the attention to detail, the feeling that someone actually cared about the guest experience, Harrison called her at the end of the third month. "I'm offering you a full-time position, regional director, 3 properties, including Richmond. You'll report directly to me, not Gordon." "What about Gordon?" "What about him?" "He's not going to like being cut out of the reporting structure." "Gordon doesn't have to like it, he just has to accept it." Harrison's voice was firm. "You've proven you can build something from nothing. Now prove you can scale it. Answer by tomorrow." "She didn't need until tomorrow, I accept." "Good. Contract details coming from Lawrence. First expansion property is in Charlotte. You start scouting locations next month." The line went dead. Brenda sat in her office, a real office now, not a construction trailer, and stared at the framed photo on her desk. The property on opening night, lights glowing, guests streaming through the entrance, the thing she'd built when everyone expected her to fail. She thought about Rich, briefly. Wondered if he'd heard somehow that she wasn't failing anymore, wondered if it would matter to him. Then she pushed the thought away and opened her laptop. She had work to do, and for the first time in her life, that work was building something that could last. Gordon could watch all he wanted. She wasn't going anywhere. Chapter 5. She's not the same person I married. One season after she left, Rich Martin saw his ex-wife across a hotel lobby and didn't recognize her at first. The conference was in Atlanta, 3 days of panels about real estate development and hospitality trends. Rich's firm had sent him to network, make contacts, pretend he was invested in his career instead of just going through the motions. He'd been standing near the registration desk, checking his phone out of habit, when someone walked past him with the kind of presence that made people turn and look. She wore a grey suit that fit like it had been made for her. Her hair was different, shorter, styled in a way that looked both professional and effortless. She moved through the crowd with purpose, stopping occasionally to greet people who seemed genuinely pleased to see her. It took him 3 full seconds to realize he was looking at Brenda. His first instinct was to walk away, to avoid the inevitable awkwardness of running into an ex-wife who probably hated him. But something kept him rooted in place, watching her shake hands with a man in an expensive suit, listening to her laugh at something the man said. The laugh was the same. Everything else about her was utterly transformed. The morning session was a panel discussion on innovation in hospitality. Rich took a seat near the back, telling himself he was there for the professional content, and not because Brenda's name was listed as one of the speakers. She sat on stage with 3 other panelists, all of them accomplished professionals with impressive credentials listed in the program. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't hesitate or qualify her statements. She just talked, clear, confident, persuasive. "The mistake most properties make is assuming bigger is better," she said in response to a moderator's question. "But guests don't want bigger. They want to feel like someone actually thought about their experience. That means fewer rooms with more attention to detail. It means staff who are empowered to solve problems, not just follow scripts. It means building something that feels genuine instead of manufactured." Someone in the audience asked about cost management. Brenda smiled, the kind of smile that said she'd been waiting for exactly that question. "Budget constraints force creativity. When you can't solve a problem by throwing money at it, you have to actually think. Some of my best solutions came from having limited resources and unlimited determination." She paused. That's not a handicap. It's an advantage that most people don't recognize until it's too late. Rich listened to her answer questions for 40 minutes, each response more assured than the last. This wasn't the woman who'd tested recipes in their cramped kitchen at midnight. This wasn't the woman who'd apologized when her business failed. This was someone who'd walked through fire and come out forged into something harder and sharper. When the panel ended, people swarmed her with business cards and follow-up questions. Rich waited, half hidden behind a column, trying to decide what he'd even say if he got the chance. She emerged from the crowd 15 minutes later, checking her phone as she walked toward the exit. He intercepted her near the lobby elevators, his heart hammering in a way that felt absurd for a man approaching someone he used to share a bed with, Brenda. She looked up, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Then it smoothed into polite neutrality. "Rich, hello. I didn't know you'd be here. I'm on the hospitality panel. It was listed in the program." She slipped her phone into her bag. "How have you been?" The question was perfunctory, the kind of thing you asked strangers in elevators. No real interest behind it, just social obligation. "I'm fine. Good. The firm is keeping me busy." He hated how hollow the words sounded. "I saw your presentation. It was impressive." "Thank you." Silence stretched between them. She didn't fill it. Just stood there with the patience of someone waiting for an inconvenient interruption to end. "I've been wanting to reach out," he said, even though he hadn't planned to say it. "To apologize for how things ended, for the things I said." "I appreciate that." Her tone was pleasant and utterly impenetrable. "Is there anything else? I have a meeting in 10 minutes. That's it? I apologize and you just—" He stopped, hearing how he sounded, entitled like she owed him absolution. "I thought we could talk, maybe catch up over coffee." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Brenda, please. I know I messed up, I know I said terrible things, but we were married. We meant something to each other once. Doesn't that count for anything?" She looked at him with eyes that held no anger, no hurt, no emotion he could identify. "It counted for everything when we were together. Now we're not, and I've moved on." "To what? This?" He gestured vaguely at the conference around them, playing corporate consultant and pretending you're happy. The words came out harsher than he intended. He watched her expression shift, not to hurt, but to something colder. "I'm not pretending anything. I have a career I earned, work that fulfills me, and a life I built without you. That's not playing. That's living." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "I need to go." "Wait. Goodbye, Rich." She walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and didn't look back. He stood there like an idiot, watching her disappear into the crowd, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on his chest. His fiancée, Lauren, a marketing director he'd started seeing 6 months ago, found him in the lobby an hour later. She'd been at a different session, something about digital strategy that she'd insisted they both needed to attend. "There you are. I was looking for you." She linked her arm through his. "How was the hospitality panel?" "Fine. Just fine." The woman who spoke, Brenda Reynolds, she was fantastic. Someone said she's revolutionizing Web Enterprises' approach to boutique properties. Did you hear her talk about budget constraints as creative opportunities? That was brilliant. Rich said nothing. Lauren kept talking, enthusiastic and animated, completely unaware that she was praising a woman whose name he'd never mentioned to her. They'd been engaged for 2 months, and he still hadn't told her he was divorced. It just never seemed like the right time. That night, back in his hotel room, Lauren fell asleep early while Rich sat by the window, scrolling through his phone. He found Brenda's professional profile again, the same sparse information he'd looked at before, plus new updates. Regional director now, overseeing multiple properties, a quote in an industry publication about her philosophy on guest experience. Lauren stirred in her sleep, reaching out for him without waking. He looked at her, pretty, accomplished, interested in building a life with him. Everything should have been perfect. But all he could think about was the way Brenda had looked at him in the lobby, like he was a stranger who'd asked for directions. like their entire history together was something she'd filed away and forgotten. He thought about the apartment they'd shared, the way she used to wake up early and make coffee without being asked, the recipe cards she'd written in careful handwriting. He thought about the night he'd called her a loser and walked out. He'd spent the last season telling himself that leaving had been a mutual decision, that they'd both moved on, that the divorce was inevitable. Seeing her today shattered that comfortable lie. She'd moved on, completely, thoroughly, with the kind of success that made his own life look small in comparison. He was still stuck, pretending he'd moved forward while secretly hoping time would somehow reverse itself. Lauren murmured something in her sleep. Rich turned off his phone and got into bed beside her, careful not to wake her. In the dark, he admitted something he'd been avoiding. He'd proposed to Lauren because she was there and willing, because being alone felt like admitting defeat, because having someone next to him was easier than facing what he'd destroyed. But he didn't love her. Not the way he'd loved Brenda. Not the way Brenda had deserved to be loved. And now, it was too late to fix any of it. The next morning, he attended another session and saw Brenda across the room. She was deep in conversation with someone who looked important, gesturing as she made a point. She never looked in his direction, never gave any indication that she remembered he existed. Lauren found the conference program later, the one Rich had left on the nightstand, with Brenda's panel circled in pen. "Do you know her?" Lauren asked, too casually. "The woman from the hospitality panel?" Rich could have lied, should have lied. Instead, he told the truth. "She's my ex-wife." Lauren set down the program carefully. "You never mentioned you were married before." "It didn't seem relevant." "We're engaged, Rich. Your past is relevant." She studied his face. "You circled her panel. You went to watch her speak. Why?" "I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For the way things ended." Lauren was quiet for a long time. Then she pulled off her engagement ring, a modest diamond Rich had chosen because it was what he could afford, and set it on the table between them. "I can't compete with a ghost," she said quietly, "and I won't marry someone who's still in love with someone else." "Lauren, don't. Just don't." She picked up her suitcase. "I'll catch an earlier flight home. You should stay. Finish the conference. Maybe figure out what you actually want." She left the room, closing the door with a soft click that sounded louder than shouting. Rich sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the engagement ring on the table, and finally let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done, not just to Brenda, to everyone who'd tried to love him afterward. He picked up the ring and threw it across the room. It didn't make him feel better. Nothing did. Chapter 6. Every success she has reminds me what I destroyed. 18 months after Brenda left, Rich's life looked perfect on paper. It felt like a performance he was too tired to keep up. The wedding happened on a Saturday in June, in a venue Lauren's mother chose because it photographed well 200 guests. A cake with too many tears, vows Rich recited from memory while thinking about someone who wasn't there. Lauren looked beautiful in her dress, radiant in the way brides are supposed to be. She smiled when he slipped the ring on her finger. She kissed him when the officiant said she could. She danced with him at the reception while her friends took photos and her family toasted their future. Rich went through every motion, said every word, played the role of devoted husband with enough conviction that nobody questioned it, except him. The honeymoon was a week in the Caribbean, which Lauren had planned down to the hour. Snorkeling excursions, couples massages, romantic dinners on the beach. She posted photos every day with captions about eternal love and new beginnings. Rich looked at those photos and barely recognized the man in them. On the fourth day, sitting on their balcony while Lauren napped inside, he overheard a conversation from the neighboring room. A woman's voice, younger and bright. "He took me to this tiny restaurant in the middle of nowhere, and it was the best meal I've ever had. Not because the food was fancy, just because he remembered I mentioned wanting to go there once, 6 months ago. Her companion laughed. That's love, paying attention to the small things. Rich closed his eyes, remembering. Brenda had mentioned once, in passing, that she wanted to visit a food festival 3 towns over. He'd forgotten about it immediately. She'd never brought it up again. When he got back from his honeymoon, there was a message from his mother waiting on his voicemail. Saw the wedding photos. Lauren looks lovely. Call me when you get a chance. He called that evening. Lauren was in the shower, giving him privacy he didn't deserve. Your father and I are happy for you, his mother said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Lauren seems like a nice woman. She is. Very different from Brenda. Rich said nothing. His mother sighed. I ran into Julia Reeves at the market last week. You remember her? The food blogger Brenda helped when she was starting out. She mentioned that Brenda's been promoted again vice president of something. She's overseeing 6 properties now. Why are you telling me this? Because you married a woman you barely know, while the woman you actually loved is building an empire without you. His mother's voice was gentle but firm. I'm telling you this so you stop pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't. I made my choice. You made a mistake, and now you're making a bigger one by refusing to admit it. Lauren came out of the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel, and smiled at him. He told his mother he had to go. The cracks started showing almost immediately. Lauren wanted things he couldn't afford, a bigger house, a nicer car, vacations he couldn't justify taking. She compared him to her friends' husbands, men who made more money and seemed more ambitious. She complained about the firm not promoting him fast enough, about their apartment being too small, about him not wanting children right away. Everyone else our age is building something, she said one evening, standing in their kitchen with her arms crossed. What are we building, Rich? A marriage, a life together. That's not enough. I want more than just existing. I want to matter. You do matter, he should have said. Instead, he thought, you're not her, and you never will be. He started working later, taking assignments he didn't need to take, finding excuses to avoid going home. Lauren noticed, but didn't push. Maybe she was relieved to have the space. Maybe she was already regretting her choice too. One evening, stuck in traffic on his way home, Rich saw a billboard advertising web luxury properties. The tagline read, "Experience the difference." Below it, in smaller text, now operating in 8 cities. He knew without checking that Brenda had something to do with those 8 cities. When he got home, Lauren announced she was pregnant. She said it with nervous excitement, like she wasn't entirely sure how he'd react. He hugged her, said all the right things, felt absolutely nothing except a distant sense of dread. That night, lying next to his pregnant wife, he thought about what kind of father he'd be, whether he'd mess this up the way he'd messed up everything else, whether his child would grow up watching him pretend to be happy and learn to pretend the same way. He thought about Brenda briefly, imagining a different version of his life, the one where he'd supported her when she failed instead of abandoning her, the one where they'd built something real together instead of him destroying what they had out of pride and stupidity. He pushed the thought away. It didn't matter what could have been. This was what was. The pregnancy was difficult. Lauren was sick constantly, exhausted and irritable. Rich tried to be supportive, but everything he did seemed wrong. He brought home the wrong food, said the wrong things, wasn't present enough or was too present, depending on her mood. They fought more than they talked, small arguments that escalated into larger ones, neither of them willing to admit the real problem. They'd married strangers and were only now realizing it. At 4 months pregnant, Lauren found a box in his office closet, the one with Brenda's recipe cards, old photos, a coffee mug with a chip in the rim that Brenda had always used. She confronted him that evening, holding the box like evidence of a crime. Why do you still have this? I forgot it was there. You forgot about a box full of your ex-wife's things? In our home? Her voice was shaking. We've been married for months, Rich. We're having a baby, and you're still keeping pieces of her? They're just things. They're proof that you never let her go. Lauren set the box down, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. I tried to ignore it. The way you zone out during conversations, the way you never talk about your past, the way you look sometimes, like you're somewhere else entirely. But this, she gestured at the box, this makes it real. Lauren, do you love me? The question was simple and devastating. Not the idea of me, not the convenience of me. He wanted to lie. Lies would have been kinder, but he was tired of pretending. I don't know, he said quietly. She started crying, not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that spoke to a hurt that ran deeper than shouting ever could. I'm carrying your child, she said when she could speak again, and you don't even know if you love me. I'm trying. Trying isn't enough. Trying is what you do when you're forcing yourself to feel something that should come naturally. She wiped her eyes. I think you should sleep in the guest room tonight. He did. And the next night. And the night after that. They stopped pretending to be happy, started living like roommates preparing for an obligation they'd created together. Lauren focused on the pregnancy. Rich focused on work. They spoke only when necessary, maintaining the bare minimum of civility required to share a living space. His father called one evening, his voice heavy with news Rich didn't want to hear. I'm sick. They found something. Starting treatment next month. Rich drove to his parents' house, sat in their living room, and listened to his father explain the diagnosis in clinical terms that made it sound less frightening than it was. His mother made tea nobody drank. His father talked about treatment plans and survival rates. Rich nodded and tried to process the information through the numb fog that had become his permanent state of being. On his way out, his father pulled him aside. I don't have time to waste on things that don't matter anymore, so I'm going to say this plainly. He looked tired in a way Rich had never seen before. Fix your marriage or end it, but stop torturing that girl by staying with her when you're somewhere else. I'm doing my best. Your best is making everyone miserable, including you. His father gripped his shoulder. I spent too many seasons doing work I hated because I thought stability mattered more than happiness. I was wrong. Don't make the same mistake. Rich drove home in silence, his father's words echoing in his mind. Lauren was packing when he got back to the apartment, not leaving, just organizing the baby's things, folding tiny clothes with mechanical precision. My mother wants us to visit next weekend, she said without looking up, for a family dinner. Okay. You don't have to come if you don't want to. I'll come. She finally looked at him. Why? You barely tolerate family events. You spend the whole time looking like you'd rather be anywhere else. Because you're my wife. Because we're having a baby. Because it's what I'm supposed to do. I don't want you there because you're supposed to be there, Rich. I want you there because you want to be there, and we both know that's never going to happen. The truth sat between them, ugly and undeniable. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it for the first time in months. You deserve better than this. I deserve someone who loves me, not someone who settled for me because the woman he actually wanted was gone. She went back to folding baby clothes, dismissing him without another word. That night, unable to sleep, Rich searched for Brenda online again, found a profile in a magazine about women in hospitality. The article praised her innovative approach, her commitment to community partnerships, her rise through the ranks of web enterprises. There was a quote from her near the end. Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you're capable of more than you thought possible. He read it 3 times, each pass making him feel smaller. While he was failing at a marriage he should never have entered, drowning in obligations he resented, Brenda was building something extraordinary. She'd moved on completely, built a life that didn't include him or need him or even acknowledge he'd ever existed. And he was still here, stuck in the wreckage of choices he'd made out of pride and fear, pretending everything was fine while everything fell apart. The baby was born in November. A girl. Lauren named her Maya. Rich held his daughter in the hospital, looking down at her tiny face, and felt a love so fierce it terrified him. He also felt the crushing weight of knowing he'd brought her into a home that was already broken. Lauren watched him from the hospital bed, exhausted and wary. "Are you going to be here for her? Actually here?" "Yes," he said, and meant it. "What about for me?" He couldn't answer that. She didn't push. They brought Maya home to an apartment that felt too small and a marriage that felt too empty, and tried to figure out how to be parents when they'd never figured out how to be partners. And somewhere in another city, Brenda Reynolds was probably working on her next property, building her empire one careful decision at a time, never thinking about the man who'd called her a loser and thrown away the best thing in his life. Rich envied her that freedom more than anything else. Chapter 7. The only thing he left me was the chance to prove him wrong. Harrison Webb passed away on a Tuesday morning, leaving behind instructions that changed everything. Brenda got the call from Lawrence at dawn. She'd been reviewing reports for the Charlotte property, coffee growing cold beside her laptop, when her phone rang. "Harrison passed during the night," Lawrence said, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. "Peacefully in his sleep. He left specific instructions about who should be notified first. You were on that list." She set down her coffee cup carefully, her hand surprisingly steady. "When is the service?" "Friday. Private ceremony, family only. But he left something for you, a letter. I'll have it delivered this morning." The letter arrived 2 hours later, sealed in an envelope with her name written in Harrison's distinctive scrawl. She opened it standing in her kitchen, still in the clothes she'd worn all night. "Brenda, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Good. I've been tired for a long time and I'm ready for whatever comes next. I've watched you build something extraordinary these past few seasons. Not because I handed it to you. I gave you a chance, nothing more. You did the work. You earned every promotion, every success, every moment of respect. Remember that when people try to diminish what you've accomplished. My will is being read next week. You'll be invited. My children know about you, know what I've decided, and they're fine with it. They have more than enough. And they watched you earn what I'm leaving you. Don't waste time feeling guilty or grateful, just keep building. That's what I would have done." The will reading happened in a conference room that smelled like expensive wood and old money. Harrison's children were there, 2 daughters and a son, all in their 50s, all composed in the way wealthy people learn to be. Gordon Hale sat in the corner, his expression unreadable. Brenda sat alone, feeling like an intruder in someone else's family grief. The attorney read through the will with practiced efficiency. Property distributions, charitable donations, specific bequests to employees who'd been with Harrison for decades. Then, to Brenda Reynolds, I leave 5% equity in the hospitality division of Webb Enterprises, along with full voting rights attached to those shares. Additionally, I leave my formal recommendation to the board that Ms. Reynolds be appointed Chief Operating Officer of the Hospitality Division, effective immediately. The room was silent. Harrison's oldest daughter, a woman named Catherine who'd built her own successful law practice, spoke first. "Ms. Reynolds, my father talked about you constantly. He considered you the daughter he chose. We honor his wishes." The son, Thomas, nodded. "You earned this. Anyone who's reviewed the performance metrics knows that." Gordon Hale stood and walked out without a word. The next week was a blur of meetings, paperwork, interviews with board members who wanted to assess whether Harrison's faith in her was justified. She answered every question, presented every metric, demonstrated every competency they needed to see. The board voted. She was named Chief Operating Officer, 5% of a billion-dollar division, a seat at the table. The authority to make decisions that would affect thousands of employees and millions of guests. The news made it to the business section of major publications within days. Not front-page coverage, but mentions, recognition, proof that she'd gone from sleeping in her car to running a hospitality empire in less than 3 seasons. Rich read about it online, sitting in his apartment while Lauren slept in their bedroom with baby Maya. He stared at the numbers in the article, 5% of a billion-dollar division, estimated value in the tens of millions, until they stopped making sense. He thought about the $47 she'd had when she left him, thought about calling her a loser, thought about the life they could have built together if he hadn't been too proud and stupid to see what he had. Then he thought about writing her a letter. He drafted it on his laptop, writing and deleting and rewriting until the words felt almost right. An apology. An acknowledgement of what he'd done. Not asking for anything, just trying to explain the things he should have said when they still mattered. He spent 2 days refining it, made it perfect. Addressed an envelope to Web Enterprises headquarters. Then he spent another week staring at it, trying to decide if sending it would make any difference or just make him feel better about himself. Finally, he sent it. No response came. He hadn't really expected one. Meanwhile, Lauren filed for separation. Not divorce yet, just space to figure out what they were doing. She moved back in with her mother, taking Maya with her. Rich didn't fight it. They both knew the marriage had been over before it started. His father's treatment wasn't working. The doctors started talking about timelines and quality of life. Rich spent his weekends driving to his parents' house, sitting with his father, trying to find words for the things they'd never talked about. "I made a mess of everything," he admitted one afternoon, sitting in his childhood bedroom while his father rested downstairs. "Most people do," his mother said from the doorway. "The question is what you do about it. There's nothing to do. Brenda's moved on. Lauren's moving out. I'm just—" He gestured vaguely at nothing. "Here. Then stop being just here and be somewhere. Do something. Fix what can be fixed and accept what can't." She sat beside him on the bed. "Your father regrets the seasons he wasted being miserable at work he hated. Don't waste your life the same way." But Rich didn't know how to not waste it. Didn't know how to move forward when every path seemed to lead nowhere. He kept working, kept paying child support, kept visiting Maya on weekends, trying to be the kind of father who showed up even when showing up hurt. One evening, driving home from his parents' house, he stopped at a coffee shop and saw a woman who looked like Brenda from behind. Same posture, same way of holding herself. His heart jumped before his brain caught up and realized it wasn't her. It was never her. She was in another city, probably in a meeting or overseeing a property or doing the 1,000 things successful people do when they're building empires. She wasn't thinking about him, wasn't wondering what he was doing or whether he was okay or if he'd learned anything from destroying what they had. She'd erased him from her life as thoroughly as he'd tried to erase her from his. The difference was, she'd succeeded. Rich went home to his empty apartment, microwaved a meal he barely tasted, and fell asleep on the couch watching television. He didn't care about. This was his life now. This was what he'd chosen when he walked away from someone who actually loved him. And the worst part, the part that kept him awake most nights, was knowing he'd do it all differently if he got another chance. But second chances don't work that way. You don't get to undo the damage just because you finally understand what you destroyed. A month later, a package arrived at his apartment, no return address. Inside was his letter to Brenda, unopened, with a note paper clipped to the envelope. The note was typed, professional, impersonal. Ms. Reynolds appreciates your correspondence but has requested no further contact. Please respect her wishes. Not from her, from an assistant. Someone paid to handle inconveniences. He'd been reduced to an inconvenience, not even worth responding to, personally. Rich threw the package in the trash, letter and all, and tried to pretend it didn't matter. It mattered more than almost anything. Chapter 8. I'm not here for closure, I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. 2 seasons after Brenda left, Rich Martin's second marriage ended the same week his father was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Lauren served him with divorce papers on a Thursday. His father called with test results on Friday. By Saturday, Rich was sitting in his car outside a hospital, trying to remember what it felt like to have control over anything in his life. The divorce was expensive. Lauren wanted full custody of Maya, child support that would stretch his already strained finances, and half of everything he'd managed to save her attorney was ruthless. His attorney was overworked and underpaid. The settlement left him with almost nothing. His father's illness moved fast. Treatment bought time but not much hope. Rich spent evenings at his parents' house, watching his father shrink into someone unrecognizable, listening to conversations about wills and final wishes and things nobody wanted to talk about but couldn't avoid. At the firm, they passed him over for partner again. The 3rd time in as many seasons. His supervisor pulled him aside and suggested gently that maybe he'd plateau, that maybe he should accept his current position and stop expecting advancement that wasn't coming. Rich cleaned out his office that evening and quit before they could make the decision for him. He found work at a smaller firm. Less prestige, less pay, less everything, but at least it was something. His apartment lease ended. He moved into a place he could actually afford, a studio in a neighborhood that made him check his locks twice before bed. His furniture barely fit. His daughter's toys took up more space than his own belongings. Maya visited on weekends. She was learning to walk, to talk, to be a person. Rich loved her with a ferocity that surprised him. But loving her just made him more aware of everything he'd failed at. He was a cautionary tale in his own life. One evening, scrolling mindlessly through his phone, he saw an announcement. Webb Enterprises had broken ground on their 20th property. Brenda's face was in the promotional photo, standing beside city officials, looking confident and accomplished and utterly unreachable. He counted on his fingers. 20 properties in just over 2 seasons. While he'd been losing marriages and jobs and any sense of direction, she'd been building an empire. The contrast felt like punishment. His father died on a Tuesday in early spring, peacefully, surrounded by family, with his affairs in order and his goodbyes already said. The funeral was small. Rich gave a eulogy he'd written the night before, words about legacy and love that felt inadequate for the man who'd raised him. After the service, his mother pulled him aside. Your father left you something, instructions really. She handed him a sealed envelope. He wanted you to have this. Inside was a letter in his father's shaky handwriting. Rich, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope I went peacefully and didn't linger too long being a burden to your mother. I spent too much of my life being miserable working jobs I hated, staying in situations that made me unhappy because I thought stability mattered more than fulfillment. I was wrong about most of it. You've made mistakes, big ones, the kind that can't be undone, but you're still here, and you still have time to do something different. Don't waste it being who you think you should be. Figure out who you actually want to be, and then do the hard work of becoming that person. Your daughter needs a father who's present. Your mother needs a son who's honest, and you need to forgive yourself for being human. Nobody gets everything right the first time. Some of us don't get it right at all. Stop punishing yourself for the past and start building something better. That's all any of us can do. Love. Dad. Rich read the letter 3 times, sitting in his car outside the funeral home, and let himself cry for the first time since everything fell apart. That evening, he made a decision that felt both desperate and inevitable. He was going to see Brenda one last time, not to ask for anything, not to beg for forgiveness or a second chance, just to tell her the truth about everything, what he'd destroyed, what he'd learned, what he understood now that he'd been too blind to see before. She probably wouldn't care, might not even agree to see him, but he needed to try, not for her, for himself. Because living with regret was slowly killing him, and the only thing that might make it bearable was saying the things he should have said seasons ago. He found out through careful research that she was speaking at a conference in the city where they'd gotten married. The coincidence felt like fate or mockery, probably both. He bought a cheap ticket, showed up in the only suit he still owned that fit properly, sat through her speech about innovation and leadership and building something meaningful. She was brilliant, composed, everything he remembered, and nothing like the woman he'd been married to. Success had transformed her into someone he barely recognized. After the speech, he waited outside the venue, rehearsing what he'd say. She emerged an hour later, alone for once, checking her phone as she walked. Brenda. She looked up. He watched recognition flicker across her face, followed by something that might have been annoyance or resignation, rich. No warmth, no curiosity, just acknowledgement that he existed and was currently in her way. I know you don't want to talk to me. I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I need... He stopped, hearing how selfish it sounded, how focused on his needs instead of hers. Could we talk? Just for a few minutes? She glanced at her phone, then back at him. I have dinner in an hour. I won't take long. She sighed. The kind of sigh people make when they're accommodating an inconvenience. They don't have the energy to refuse. There's a coffee shop around the corner. 5 minutes. They walked in silence. The coffee shop was nearly empty. Just a few students with laptops and a barista who looked half asleep. Brenda ordered nothing. Rich bought a coffee he didn't want, just to have something to do with his hands. They sat at a table by the window. She waited, polite and impatient, for him to start. My father died last week, he said. I'm sorry for your loss. The response was automatic, sincere but impersonal, the kind of thing you said to strangers. My second marriage ended. I have a daughter. Her name is Maya. He realized Brenda didn't care about his daughter, didn't care about any of this. I'm not here for closure. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go with this. She frowned slightly. With what? The truth. About what I did to you. About why I left. About all of it. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. I called you a loser because I was terrified of being associated with failure. I left because I thought your problems would drag me down. I abandoned you when you needed me because I was selfish and cruel and too focused on what people thought of me to care about what I was doing to you. Brenda's expression didn't change. Is this the part where I tell you it's okay? That I forgive you and you can feel better about yourself? No, I don't want forgiveness. I don't deserve it. He struggled to find words that weren't completely self-serving. I needed you to know that I understand now what I destroyed, what you were worth, what we could have had if I'd been a better person. She looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. I needed to hear this 2 seasons ago when I was sleeping in my car, wondering if I'd ever recover. When I was fighting to rebuild and could have used someone who believed in me. She picked up her bag. Now I don't need it. I don't need you to understand. I don't need your apology. I've moved on completely, and your guilt or growth or whatever this is, it doesn't factor into my life anymore. I know that. Then why are you here? Because watching you succeed is the only thing that makes what I did bearable. Because seeing you prove me wrong is the closest thing to redemption I'm ever going to get. Because... He stopped, realizing how pathetic it sounded. Because I'm still in love with you, and I needed you to know that before you disappear completely. The words hung between them like smoke. Brenda stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder. That's not my problem to solve, Rich. You had someone who loved you completely, who would have fought through anything with you. You threw that away because it wasn't convenient. What you feel now, that's just regret dressed up as love, and I'm not interested in either. She walked to the door, then paused and turned back. I hope you figure out how to be happy. I really do. But it won't be with me. I've built a life I'm proud of, and you're not part of it. Please respect that. Then she was gone. Rich sat in the coffee shop until closing, staring at his untouched coffee, feeling the full weight of every choice he'd ever made. Outside the window, he saw Brenda meet a man on the sidewalk. Tall, wearing a casual jacket, smiling like she'd made his day just by showing up. The man kissed her forehead, easy and familiar, the gesture of someone who had the right to touch her that way. She smiled. A real smile, the kind Rich used to see in their early days before everything got complicated. They walked away together, her hand in his, disappearing into the evening crowd. Rich finally understood what he'd been refusing to accept. He wasn't part of her story anymore. He was barely a footnote in a chapter she'd closed and moved past, and there was nothing he could do about it, except learn to live with what he'd destroyed. He left the coffee shop and walked back to his hotel alone, carrying the weight of a love he'd killed through his own stupidity, wondering if forgiveness from yourself was even possible when you couldn't forgive what you'd done. Chapter 9. You're asking for the wrong thing. 3 seasons after she left, Rich Martin made his final attempt. He didn't come with apologies this time. He came with the truth. He'd been in therapy for 6 months, court-ordered initially as part of his custody arrangement with Lauren, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being an obligation and became the only hour of his week that felt honest. His therapist was a woman named Dr. Chen, who didn't let him hide behind excuses or self-pity. She asked hard questions and waited through long silences until he found answers. "Why do you think you keep trying to contact your ex-wife?" she asked during one session. "Because I want her to know I've changed." "Have you changed?" "I'm trying." "That's not the same thing." Dr. Chen set down her notepad. "What do you want from her, Rich? Really?" He thought about it for a long time. "I want her to know I understand what I did." "Why does that matter?" "Because—" He stopped, realizing he didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he had an answer he didn't want to admit. "Because if she knows I understand, then maybe it wasn't all meaningless. Maybe I learned something. Maybe I'm not just the person who destroyed the best thing in my life for no reason. So this is about your own redemption, not hers." The words hit harder than they should have. "I guess so." "Then you're asking for the wrong thing. You're asking her to absolve you so you can feel better about yourself. That's not fair to her. She's already done the hard work of moving on. Why should she have to carry your guilt too?" Rich had no answer for that. He kept going to therapy anyway, started doing the actual work of figuring out who he was and why he made the choices he did. It was painful, peeling back layers of pride and fear and learned behavior that had been directing his life without his conscious awareness. He realized, slowly, that he'd spent his entire adult life chasing an image of success that someone else had defined for him. That he'd measured his worth by his job title and his paycheck and what people thought when they looked at him, and in the process, he'd destroyed the only relationship where he'd been valued for something other than his achievements. He started building a different kind of life, smaller, quieter, more honest. He took a teaching position at a community college, something he'd considered seasons ago and dismissed as beneath him. The pay was terrible. The prestige was non-existent. But he liked the work, liked helping students who were struggling, who reminded him of himself before he got too proud to admit he needed help. He focused on being a good father to Maya, showed up for every custody visit, every school event, every small moment that mattered. Lauren noticed the change, softened slightly in her interactions with him. They weren't friends, but they managed to be effective co-parents. He moved to a better apartment, started running in the mornings, adopted a dog from a shelter, a mutt with anxiety issues who'd been abandoned, and learned to trust again. The dog helped. Having something that needed him, that didn't judge his past, made the lonely evenings more bearable. But he couldn't stop thinking about Brenda, not obsessively, not the way he had in the beginning, just wondering how she was doing, whether she was happy. If she ever thought about what they'd had before he destroyed it, he knew he shouldn't reach out again. Knew she'd made her position clear. But something his father wrote in that final letter kept circulating through his mind. Some of us don't get it right at all. Maybe that was his truth. Maybe he'd never get it right with Brenda. But he could at least be honest about what happened and what he'd learned, even if it changed nothing. He found out through public sources that Brenda was overseeing the opening of a new property in the city where they'd gotten married. The symmetry felt too perfect to ignore. He sent a message through Web Enterprise's contact system, not expecting a response. Just asking if she'd be willing to meet. Not for forgiveness, not for closure. Just to talk. He didn't expect her to say yes. She did. Her email was brief. I'll be at the new property Thursday afternoon. 3 o'clock. You have 30 minutes. He showed up 15 minutes early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first court appearance. The property was beautiful, a renovated historic building with modern touches that felt elegant without being pretentious. Every detail showed the kind of careful thought that had always been Brenda's trademark. She met him in the hotel restaurant, at a table by the window overlooking the river. She wore a simple dress and minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back, looking professional and untouchable. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said as he sat down. "You said in your message that you weren't looking for forgiveness. I'm curious what you are looking for." She folded her hands on the table, waiting. "Nothing, actually. I'm not here to ask for anything. He took a breath, trying to organize thoughts he'd been rehearsing for days. "I've been in therapy, working on myself, trying to understand why I made the choices I did. And I realized something." "What's that?" "I spent 2 seasons thinking you owed me a second chance, that if I apologized enough or showed you I'd changed, you'd come back. But that was just another version of the same selfishness that destroyed our marriage." He met her eyes. "You don't owe me anything. You never did. And I'm not here to change that. I'm here because I wanted you to know that watching you succeed, really succeed, on your own terms, is the only good thing to come out of everything I did wrong." Brenda's expression didn't change, but something in her posture relaxed slightly. "Go on." "I destroyed what we had because I was afraid. Afraid of being associated with failure. Afraid of what people would think. Afraid of not being enough." He shook his head. "And the irony is, in trying to avoid being a failure, I became exactly that. I failed you. Failed myself. Failed everyone who tried to love me afterward. You're not looking for me to argue with that assessment. No. I'm just stating facts." He glanced out the window at the river. "My second marriage ended. I have a daughter I'm trying to be a better father to. I changed careers, moved to a smaller place, started over in a lot of ways. Not because I thought it would impress you or win you back, just because I couldn't keep living the way I was living." "That's good. I'm glad you're making changes." Her tone was pleasant but distant, like she was talking to an acquaintance about weather patterns. "I know you've moved on," he continued. "I saw you with someone at the conference last season. You looked happy. Really happy. And I wanted you to know that I'm genuinely glad about that. You deserve happiness with someone who values you the way I should have." Brenda looked at him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "His name is Daniel. He's an architect. He designs most of my properties. We've been together for over a season. He proposed last month, and I said yes." The words should have hurt. They did a little, but mostly what Rich felt was a strange sense of relief. She'd found someone who was there for her, who showed up, who didn't abandon her when things got hard. "I'm happy for you. I mean that." "I know you do. That's why I agreed to meet with you." She paused. "You're not the person I married anymore, but you're also not the person who called me a loser and walked out. You're someone trying to do better, and that matters. Does it make any difference to how you see what happened?" "No, what happened still happened. You still hurt me in ways that took a long time to recover from. But," she chose her words carefully, "I'm not angry anymore. I was, for a long time. But anger takes energy I'd rather spend on other things, so I let it go." Forgiveness? Acceptance? They're not the same thing. She glanced at her watch. "You have 10 more minutes. Is there anything else you wanted to say?" "Just that I'm sorry, for all of it, for wasting the time we had together, for not seeing what I had until it was gone, for making you feel like your worth was conditional on your success." He cleared his throat. "And that I hope Daniel knows how lucky he is." Brenda smiled, a small, genuine smile. "He does. He tells me constantly." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the river flow past. "Can I ask you something?" Brenda said finally. "Why now? Why did you keep trying to reach out, even when I made it clear I'd moved on?" "Because I needed to understand it myself. Why I did what I did, what I destroyed, what it cost both of us." He met her eyes. "And because I needed to hear you say you were happy without me, not because it makes me feel better, because it makes the whole thing mean something. You didn't just survive what I did to you, you built something extraordinary despite it. That matters." "It does, but not for the reasons you think." She stood, signaling that their time was up. "I didn't build this empire to prove you wrong, Rich. I built it because I finally believed in myself enough to try. What you thought stopped mattering a long time ago." She walked him to the door of the restaurant, professional and gracious. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. "You're welcome. I hope you find what you're looking for." "I'm not looking for anything anymore. I'm just trying to be better." "That's a good place to start." She extended her hand, and he shook it. "Goodbye, Rich." "Goodbye, Brenda." He walked out of the hotel and stood on the sidewalk, watching the river and feeling something he hadn't felt in seasons. Peace, not happiness, not redemption. Just the quiet acceptance that this was how things ended, and that was okay. Inside the hotel, through the window, he saw Brenda greet Daniel, tall, kind-looking, exactly the kind of person she deserved. They kissed, easy and natural, and walked toward the elevators together. Rich turned and walked the other direction, toward his car, toward his daughter, toward a life that was smaller and quieter, but finally honest. He didn't look back. For the first time in 3 seasons, he didn't need to. Chapter 10. I didn't build an empire to prove him wrong. I built it because I finally believed in myself. 5 seasons after the night she spent in her car, Brenda Reynolds stood in front of 200 women at her leadership training center and told the truth. The center occupied the building where her catering business had failed. She'd bought it 3 seasons ago and transformed it into something that mattered, a place where women who'd lost everything could learn to build something new. The irony wasn't lost on her. Neither was the satisfaction. The women in the audience ranged from their 20s to their 60s. Some were recovering from divorce, others from business failures. A few from situations far worse than anything Brenda had experienced. They all shared the same look, determination mixed with exhaustion, hope fighting with doubt. People always ask if success tastes sweeter after you've lost everything, Brenda said from the podium. Like there's some kind of extra reward for suffering first, but that's not how it works. She paused, looking out at the faces watching her. Success doesn't taste like revenge. It doesn't taste like vindication. It tastes like relief. Like finally being able to breathe after holding your breath for too long. Like waking up and realizing you're not afraid anymore. Someone in the front row wiped her eyes. Brenda recognized the gesture. She'd done it herself, back when tears came easier than confidence. I started with $47 and a car. I was sleeping in, no prospects, no safety net, just a phone call from someone who decided to take a chance on me when I had nothing to offer but willingness to work. She smiled. Harrison Webb gave me an opportunity, but that's all it was, an opportunity. I did the work. I earned everything that came after. The training center had graduated over 400 women in its 3 seasons of operation. Some had started small businesses. Others had found positions at companies that valued them. A few had become instructors themselves, teaching the next wave of women who needed someone to believe in them. The question isn't whether you can rebuild, Brenda continued. It's whether you believe you deserve to, and that's the hardest part. Convincing yourself that what happened to you doesn't define what happens next. After the speech, women lined up to talk to her, to ask questions, to tell her their stories. She listened to each one, remembered what it felt like to need someone to listen without judgment. Daniel found her an hour later, leaning against her car in the parking lot, staring at the building. "You look contemplative," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Just thinking about how different things are now? Better different or strange different?" "Both." She leaned into him, comfortable and easy. "Remember when we met? I was so focused on proving I could do the Richmond property that I barely noticed you existed. I noticed you. You were terrifying and impressive in equal measure." He kissed her temple. "Still are, honestly." They'd been married for 6 months. The ceremony had been small. Her sister, Daniel's family, a handful of friends who'd been there through the hard seasons. Harrison's children had sent flowers and a note that made her cry in the best way. No one from her past had been invited. She'd left that door closed. "I got a letter today," she said, "from Rich." Daniel tensed slightly. What did it say? That he's written a book about failure and accountability. He's donating the proceeds to the training center. She pulled the letter from her purse, showed Daniel the brief note. "He's not asking for anything, just wanted me to know." "How do you feel about that?" "Nothing, mostly. It's generous, and I'll accept the donation because it helps women who need it, but it doesn't change anything about what happened." She folded the letter, tucked it away. "He's trying to make peace with his choices. That's his journey, not mine." They drove home in comfortable silence, a house in a neighborhood she'd chosen because it felt safe and quiet. No ostentatious displays of wealth, just space to breathe. Over dinner, Daniel mentioned a new project, a property in Seattle that would be her most ambitious yet. She listened to his ideas, added her own, watched him sketch rough designs on a napkin. This was her life now. Building things with someone who valued her input, who showed up every day, who never once made her feel like loving him was a risk she'd regret. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, catching her staring. "How lucky I am." "I'm the lucky one." "We can both be lucky." He laughed, and she joined him, and the evening stretched into night with the kind of ease that came from choosing the right person instead of settling for whoever stayed. Later, alone in her office, Brenda reviewed reports from her properties. 30 locations now across 15 cities. Webb Enterprises had grown beyond Harrison's original vision, and she'd been the architect of much of that growth. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kim, who now managed 3 properties and had just been promoted to regional director. "Remember when Gordon said we'd fail before the Richmond opening? Just approved his retirement package. Thought you'd appreciate the irony." Brenda smiled, typed back, "I hope he enjoys his retirement." She meant it. Gordon had made her work harder, think sharper, prove everything twice. In a strange way, she was grateful for the obstacles he'd created. They'd forced her to be better than good enough. A journalist from a major publication had contacted her last week, wanting to interview her for a profile piece. The focus was on women who'd rebuilt after major setbacks. Brenda had agreed, with one condition: no mention of her marriage or divorce. That wasn't the story she wanted told. "Why not?" the journalist had asked. "It's compelling. Woman leaves abusive marriage, builds empire." "It wasn't abusive. It was just wrong, and I didn't build an empire because of what he did to me. I built it despite what happened. There's a difference." The journalist had agreed to her terms. Some stories didn't need all their chapters told. Some pieces of the past were better left in the past. Brenda closed her laptop and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, lights flickering in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Rich was probably living his smaller life, teaching his classes, being a father to his daughter. She hoped he was happy, not because it gave her satisfaction or closure, but because she'd stopped measuring her success by his failure. His life had nothing to do with hers anymore. That was the real victory, not caring enough to keep score. Her phone rang. Her sister, calling to finalize plans for their mother's birthday next month. "I still can't believe you own the building where your business failed," her sister said. "That's such a power move." "It's not about power, it's about transformation, taking something painful and making it useful." "Whatever you say, I still think it's badass." After they hung up, Brenda returned to the living room where Daniel was reading, their dog curled at his feet. Normal, peaceful. The kind of life she used to think was boring until she realized it was actually just stable. "Come to bed," Daniel said, setting aside his book. "You've been working all day." She followed him upstairs, leaving her phone and laptop behind, leaving the empire she'd built to take care of itself for a few hours. In the darkness, comfortable and safe, she thought about the woman she'd been 5 seasons ago, sleeping in her car, $47. No idea what came next. That woman would be proud of who she'd become, not because of the money or the properties or the recognition, because she'd figured out how to value herself. Even when someone she loved couldn't see her worth, the empire was just proof she'd done the work. But the work wasn't about building buildings. It was about building belief in herself, in her decisions, in her right to take up space and demand respect. She'd done that. Every day, in small ways and large ones, she'd proven to herself that she was enough. And Rich's opinion, his regret, his journey toward understanding, none of it mattered anymore. She'd spent seasons waiting for someone to see her value. Then she'd learned to see it herself. That was the real story, not the empire, not the comeback, just a woman who fell apart and decided the ground wasn't where she belonged. Everything else was just details.